Hello everyone, this is PrussianPrince with another Total War Warhammer 2 Battlecast. Joining me we have Eric Rastic. Hello Eric Rastic.
Hey there, guys.
So he's going to be helping me cast this battle that I played against the Falcon. I'm playing as the Dwarfs against the Lizardmen here. And this is Amber Bow map, so I decided as the Dwarfs, obviously, just camp on a hill with my build. So I have two cannons back out here in the center of the formation. All the way in the center we do have the Longbeards with great weapons. Supporting them in the back we have three dwarf warriors, then on the left flank a dwarf warrior, and on the right also a dwarf warrior. So I do have in total 5 dwarf warriors. Now up front in the center, two Longbeards, and on the flanks of each of those units also basically a Longbeard on flank of those. So 4 Longbeards total. Behind those we do have 3 Thunderers, and last but not least 2 Runesmiths and my Lord, who is just a generic Lord with Stand Your Ground. Now the Runesmiths, I didn't spend too much money on them, I would think, but I did get some, basically, as you can see, I have some abilities on, well, basically 3 abilities on one Runesmith and only 2 on the other one. I could have spent more money, but, you know, I didn't go full on crazy with that. Now, what can you tell me about the Lizardmen build here, Eric Restic?
Well, right now, we're looking at the leadership, which is none other than a Kroxigor Ancient. Very potent duelist, not that spectacular for fighting large units, but with the Horn of Kygor, he does really nicely for supporting all manner of engagement. And he's also very adept at splatting foot characters. Over for the caster, it's a very simple Skink Priest of Beasts, probably costs no more than 450 or so. Packing just the Amber Spear, really nice spell for lining up right along infantry in combat. Usually takes out about half a unit or so per cast, so provided that it gets into the right spot, can be very potent. We have an Engine of the Gods, Ancient Stegodon, which normally not a very good pick in most situations. However, in the context of dwarves, you can force them into a bit of an ultimatum where keeping their guns online becomes a little bit more difficult, since aside from pressure that you put in with your own units, dropping down one of those little, what's it called, orbital bombardments, I'll call it, can also force them to reposition their missile units and thus increase the downtime on shooting. And then, of course, Falcon's favorite Stegodon, the Thunderous one, just plows through lines, has really nice leadership at right now 98, since it's right next to the leadership core, and also drops down those little lightning strikes. Normally very good against units of cavalry, since they typically kill it by surrounding it, and it has some built-in countermeasures. We're looking at a front line of 5 Skink cohort. Not going to trade very well into any of the dwarf infantry, but they're quick and they'll just harass the line, create some micro problems, etc. And then we've got 2 red-crested skinks operating on the flanks of this infantry core, just as, again, a flanker, but most importantly, providing a little bit of poison and armor piercing to help chunk through some of the dwarven armor. And the last core, or the last contingent of this army, I should say, is comprised of 4 Pterodon riders, one of which is the Regiment of Renowned Pahawk Sentinels, whose drop rocks are absolutely devastating. We'll probably be seeing at least 1 unit getting nuked by those. So, back to you, Prussian Prince. I think we should get this on.
So this is pretty interesting, because in prior games that I played against him, he actually put the red-crested skinks in the center. I think that was against Wood Elves and High Elves, though, so like it's not against Dwarves. So pretty interesting that he actually decided to switch that around this time by not having the red-crested skinks in the center. Now, is there any particular reason why you would want to change that depending on the matchup?
Well, in this particular case, just looking at his formation, I can tell that what he's aiming for is overloading. Oh, sorry, there were actually three red-crested skinks. I missed those two that were kind of on top of each other. What he intends to do is overload the left, or sorry, your right flank, his left, and then from there, kind of force you to reposition your units. Perhaps run the Skink Priest of Beasts up to where the middle of his army is now, so that once you reform your lines, he'll be right around where the flank of some of these Longbeards would be to get in a really nice amber spear. And then while you're taking care of all of that, dealing with that heavy flank, these lone units of skinks off to the side will collide with what actually ends up becoming your back line once you shift your lines, where the skinks in the middle will just kind of wait patiently, looking for openings in your formation and just try to drag everything out of position.
Yep, that actually does make a lot of sense. And before we begin, I should actually mention that Ericrastic does have a Twitch channel, so I'm going to link it in the description before I forget. I almost forgot. I was gonna tell Ericrastic to press play, but I remembered I should have done this in the beginning. But yeah,
Well,
do check out Ericrastic's Twitch channel in the description. He does stream competitive Total War Warhammer 2 multiplayer battles. Now, before we begin, can you do a little bit of analysis on the dwarf build and also, like, in particular, also what's wrong with the positioning?
Yes, of course. So right now what we're looking at is that the dwarves are literally squared up to meet the lizardmen. However, the main issue here is that given the terrain of the map, the second cannon kind of further towards the dwarven right flank is a little bit, I'd say, not in the best of positions regarding line of sight. In this particular case, given Falcon's deployment, I don't think it'll make too large of a difference. But had he instead opted to deploy the majority of his forces or overload his right-hand flank or the dwarven left, then I think it's very likely that that cannon at the bottom of the hill would have had a little bit of trouble getting line of sight as they crest the first bend, maybe 100 meters in front of where his army is now. And then aside from that, I think that something that's also conducive to getting this army a bit overrun, perhaps quicker than normal, is the fact that the dwarf warriors in the back are kind of completing a full box when instead I believe they would be better spent screening out in front of the army. Since given the map's deployment, I'm not sure if there's a vanguard zone back here. If there was, then actually that would be quite funny. But even in that circumstance, I don't think you need any more than perhaps 2 units to guard the back line, and then that leaves 3 units of dwarf warriors and the longbeards with great weapons in a position to take on more of an active defensive role, creating more space for the thunderers and just helping zone out some of the units.
All right.
So I think that would be my main critique of this dwarf formation in particular.
Right. So, what about the runesmiths, by the way? Because I wasn't entirely sure what to pick on them. I'm not sure if I overspent or underspent on them. Actually, like if you take a look at the abilities that I've chosen for them.
Yeah. So I'm seeing one of them having Forge Fire, the Hammer of Kara's Drak, Rune of Negation, and I believe that would be the Armor Rune. Yes, Oath and Steel. And then the other one is packing just the defensive kit, Rune of Negation, and the Rune of Oath and Steel. So I think typically most dwarf players tend to avoid the defensive runes and try to go for more of an active role. However, in this patch, the Rune of Wrath and Ruin that runesmiths take was changed to a 72% slow, well, speed and charge speed slow, effectively countering monsters and chariots specifically, which did plague the dwarves a little bit. However, I do think that the inclusion of the Rune of Wrath and Ruin in the Rune of Negation is not that bad. If I had to say though, I think I would probably cut the Rune of Negation in this particular instance because since you don't have anything like slayers with great weapons for whom chances are actually the Rune of Oath and Steel would probably be sufficient for. Since you don't have anything like that, I feel like there aren't too many targets for you to get more value out of, since Longbeards and all of these units will already beat Skinks down pretty handily. The only exception being, I believe, Saurus and Temple Guard. However, Temple Guard and Saurus are both units that you can fire in on to help support and thus kind of equalize things, or at least the Longbeards will hold them up for quite a while. So I believe that the Rune of Negation in this particular instance was a bit of a waste of funds, and perhaps also Forge Fire, since 10% armor piercing damage, the applications of that is typically dubious at best. The main thing of import is hitting breakpoints on infantry, and I don't know off the top of my head if the extra armor piercing helps Longbeards kill Skinks or anything like that in fewer hits than it would normally take them.
It's interesting. So you would have taken the Rune of Negation off both of the runesmiths then, and kept the rest except the hammer.
Except for Forge Fire, yes.
Okay. So,
but yeah, that's it for my critique.
Yeah. I think it's time we get into this game. So I'm going to do a short countdown. So on 3, 2, 1, play. Here we are. Game's begun, and I think soon I'm actually gonna start targeting the Pterodon riders with my cannons. Yes, I'm already targeting them.
I see you repositioning your Thunders, which is really nice. Right here would be a good time to push the Longbeards a bit forward, just to meet the army a little bit sooner. Pterodons are effectively zoned out for the time being, and one of them is taking shots from the Thunders, which is nice. Falcon's posturing his army up currently. He's paused his Skinks just outside of Thunder range, definitely on purpose here. And now he's moving to push them in as the Monstrous Corps starts making their way in. Looks to me, from the angle that they're coming at, they're going for a side charge on the unit of Dwarf Warriors that's protecting the flank, rather than crashing straight into the front of the Longbeards. And now as the monsters start coming in, he's going to be bringing his Pterodon Riders in as well, just as a quick follow-up. Pretty brutal volley taken by the Ancient Stegodon. But right here, the Engine of the Gods throws down that little bombardment as the Longbeards with great weapons start making their way out, and Thunders, of course, are now forced to retreat just so that they don't die to the laser. So lines have repositioned, and Falcon is now starting to get some of his monsters through. The Ancient Kroxgor made it into combat, mostly unmolested, and with the Horn of Kygor going down on the red-crested Skinks as it pushes its way in, they should have what they need to beat down on these Longbeards. Right now, Pterodon Riders are still being somewhat of a nuisance. Flying units definitely nice for tying down ranged units, and I see a little bit of a gap present itself in Dwarven formation on the far left flank, where a unit of Skink cohorts makes their way into some Thunders. So right now, Falcon's doing a pretty good job of pulling the formation apart, where PrussianPrince is managing to salvage a couple of his missile units with some good screening from Dwarf Warriors as they reposition themselves from the back line, or I guess it was actually the back line. And now the Kroxgor Ancient and the Stegodons are finding themselves in a little bit of a blob in the center. However, unfortunately, since we're so close to the edge of the map, there isn't a whole lot of room for the Thunders to escape, and Skink cohorts are chasing down most of them. A couple of engagements are being won handedly for the Dwarves in the front line. Longbeards versus Skink cohort, it's a matter of outclassing them quite severely. However, across the line, Dwarves are holding, but not doing a whole lot of killing. And the main the main threats in the monstrous core are now mostly unchallenged due to the absence of missile units, which were fortunately compromised fairly quickly. So right now, Falcon's going to be taking some skink cohorts and running off any of these red dwarf units. There is one Longbeard that actually fortunately rallied all the way off to the far side of the map there. It's a hilarious little conga line formation. But returning to the main battle, got an orbital strike coming in on some dwarf warriors as they make their way around the monster. Really nice application for these types of delayed spells, since oftentimes you can force blobs around monsters, which are then punished by these sorts of, I'll call it AoE abilities. Now, the Dwarf Lord and the Runesmith are double teaming this Crocscore Ancient, actually doing quite well because of his 32 melee defense. However, the Stegodons come in as support, and unfortunately from there, the only thing remaining for the Dwarves are a couple pockets of infantry that won their engagements. From here, I believe that the Lizardmen are going to take this off the back of those Stegodons. I heard a Amber Spear go off, not sure what it hit. I think it went through some Longbeards, just kind of finishing them off for the skink cohorts. And we've got a couple of Dwarf Warriors coming in to screen for the Dwarf Lord, which is currently getting hunted, or actually has been hunted down by the Crocscore Ancient. So given that, yeah, the Lizardman pressure was pretty relentless this game for sure.
And that is going to be it. Valiant defeat for the Dwarfs. They have been routed off the battle this time around, and you know that's the statistics are actually pretty interesting. So I deployed more. I didn't lose as much, but I still lost the battle, and I still lost it pretty hard. But I guess, like, technically it's, well, I deployed more because Falcon actually had a bunch of single entity units, and also some, well, also the Pterodon riders, so that they don't count for as many entities, obviously.
Right.
And yeah, so it's a little bit deceiving because it's not as close as the battle statistics say it is, I guess.
Right. I mean, generally speaking, for dwarves, their saving grace is the efficiency of their missile units. However, kind of the issue with that too is that the way that their roster is designed is that the infantry is kind of you paying money for a time gate in order to gain extra value out of your missile units. And that's kind of the main issue that happened here, is that the missile units were compromised a little bit too early, and due to a lack of giant slayers and slayers or other pseudo anti-large melee infantry, I guess hammers could also consider themselves in the mix, just due to the high armor piercing that they deal. Once the missile units were compromised and forced to scatter a little bit, it became that much harder for the dwarves to pull out a win, since their means of dealing with these single entities were effectively shut down. And then, you know, from there, results tend to kind of snowball a little bit.
So you said that you would have added the Slayers into this build, right? Like, what would you have taken out then, if I'm understanding you correctly?
So in that particular instance, I think I would have cut maybe one of the cannons, or perhaps downgraded both cannons to bolt throwers, since Lizardmen don't really have artillery that could outrange, or any unit that could outrange dwarven bolt throwers. And then aside from that, I believe the Longbeards with great weapons, maybe 2 dwarf warriors, and one of the runesmiths would have been pretty well substituted for either 2 giant slayers or a unit of giant slayers and the regiment of renown normal slayers, the dragonback slayers. I think that could have been a pretty potent combination, just as backline protection to punish dinosaurs and things like that as they try to make their way onto the Thunderers.
So what about miners with blasting charges? Like, when are they? Would they be good in this matchup, or like what are they more useful for?
Well, I think it's pretty hard to go wrong with miners with blasting charges. However, in this particular case, because of how quick skinks are, um, I believe that if you were to take, for example, 3 miners with blasting charges, perhaps you should only expect to get a clean set of charges off on 1 or 2 of them, just because Falcon could lead ahead of his army with the Stegodons as he kind of did, just to disrupt the blasting charges, and then in the time that the dwarves are busy trying to pick themselves back up is when the infantry would come in, and you might get off like half a volley of blasting charges that way. Um, Similarly, if his timing was good enough, you could come in with Pterodon Riders and drop rocks to again displace models, and from there you would also only get half a volley off on the units that he does that too. So there are a lot of methods for Lizardmen in this particular instance, and in general, I think, to disrupt blasting charges. So I would be pretty careful about those.
All right.
Maybe you'd take just one to kind of ward off skinks that make their way into your backline, so it would actually be better applied as sort of a backline defense unit rather than a mainline unit, which I think is a bit contrary to how they're normally used.
Really interesting. And yeah, during this battle I was actually overwhelmed already by all the I didn't have many abilities to pop during this battle, but I still ended up timing them incorrectly or popping them too late. So I
Right.
think, like on the runesmiths, for example, that was
Yeah.
an issue.
We didn't catch that in the replay. However, there were a couple of instances where Rune of Negations could have probably been better used, especially when the Longbeards with great weapons were fighting some of the monsters, keeping them in the fight for longer and applying that armor piercing that this army did desperately need could have definitely impacted the battle fairly significantly.
So with the cannons, by the way, would you have targeted the Pterodon riders as I did, or would you have targeted another entity, another unit?
In this particular instance, I feel that the ancient Kroxigor would perhaps have been one of the better choices to target with the cannon, because the main threat to your heroic core was this ancient Kroxigor, as well as the two Stegodons. And while just shooting the Stegodons with Pterodon Riders online is a little bit of a difficult prospect, since they could dive into your backline at any given moment, I feel that some persistent poke, perhaps rear attacks from your Dwarven leadership on the Stegodons could have provided 200, 300 damage here and there over the course of a prolonged game. But the absence of healing could have definitely worn the Stegodons down a bit more. And then if the leadership was dead, you would also be seeing some early routes. So some of the skinks perhaps would not have dealt quite as much damage to your Longbeards, and then they could have, from there, been used to help shield your leadership core from some of the damage from these Stegodons as they wail on them subsequently.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense, because I didn't really have the tools other than Thunderers or Longbeards with great weapons to deal with the single entity units that Falcon brought, like the Stegodons and Proxigor Ancient, and yeah, but well, both of the Stegodons, I guess. So yeah, like only I basically only had like, well, what's this, 6 units that could deal with those, I guess. And like, I don't know how well the Longbeards with great weapons would do. They would do better than the regular Longbeards, of course, but I'm not sure entirely just how much work they could actually get done, especially against all of those units, because it's not like I just have one single entity to deal with.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely a bit of a difficult prospect. Yeah, I think the only time that the Pterodon Riders would have been a priority target would be if you had opted to take Slayers. But in this particular instance, I think the most sound decision would be going for the leadership.
Yeah.
Falcon is also, for some reason, tends to get his heroes and lords sniped pretty often. So
Oh yeah, I did in the games that I won against him. That's how I won. So yeah,
yeah.
that's what happened. Yeah. What? So would you say that this was a build loss first or a micro loss?
I would probably lean towards build
Build.
loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's also what I expected. Anyway, that's going to be it for this cast though. So thank you all for watching. I hope you found it enjoyable and hope you actually learned something like I did from Eric Rastic. So if again, if you want to see his play or maybe him casting or something, you can just check him out on twitch.tv/Eric Rastic, or are you? Oh no, actually, you have like a specific.
Yeah. So
Yeah. I'll link it in the description anyway, as I said at the start. So
yeah. So my Twitch is Cuisinealis Aerocrastic. That's an underscore before
okay,
that.
that's
And then my YouTube is just Aerocrastic.
all right. Well, I'll link both then. So yeah, thanks again for casting with me, and I'll see you all next time.